She was shivering in the rain, too proud to beg, too tired to hide. He had just enough food for himself and his little girl. But when she whispered, "May I take these leftovers, sir?" he nodded. He didn't know her name. He didn't know what she was running from. And he definitely didn't know what that moment would change. If stories of quiet kindness, second chances, and unexpected connections speak to your heart, we invite you to stay till the end. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt tales that just might stay with you long after the screen fades to black. May I take these leftovers? Sir, the single dad, nodded. He had no idea she owned the building. The string quartet played its final note, a triumphant swell echoing across the marble atrium of the Lexington Grand Hotel. Crystal chandeliers glimmered like suspended stars above an audience dressed in tuxedos and designer gowns. Murmurs of anticipation ran through the crowd like static. The groom, Everett Langston III, heir to a billion-dollar political dynasty, shifted from one foot to the other beneath the rose-covered arch. The press cameras clicked in short bursts, trained on the aisle where the bride was to appear. She didn't. Madeline Walsh stood barefoot in the back hallway, silk heels dangling from her fingers, veil tossed across a velvet bench. Her reflection in the ornate mirror looked like someone else's fantasy lace bodice, diamond necklace, perfectly sculpted makeup. A woman built from expectation. "I can't do this," she whispered to no one. Outside the heavy doors, her father's voice barked into his phone. "Where is she? We don't have time for this. Get her in line." She heard his assistant mumbling a rushed apology. Her chest tightened. Madeline turned from the mirror and pulled the zipper at her back. The dress slid off her shoulders like dead weight. She caught it before it hit the floor and folded it meticulously, habitually placing it over the bench like an old habit she was finally ready to bury. For once, she wasn't going to do what was expected. 25 minutes later, the headlines read, "Walsh Heiress Vanishes. Wedding halted at the altar, CEO gone rogue, Madeline Walsh missing on wedding day." But Madeline didn't read them. She was already blocks away, coat wrapped tightly around her, walking down West 73rd with wind-whipped hair and a carry-on suitcase. No entourage, no limo, no press handler. She ducked into a side street, heart-pounding like she was being chased. In a way, she was chased by a life pre-written for her. Daughter of a ruthless real estate mogul. Wharton educated. Appointed CEO of Walsh Holdings at 32. Engaged to a man who smiled for cameras but looked through her like she was an acquisition. She used the last working credit card in her name to book a 1-month rental in Brooklyn. Small, anonymous, just outside a neighborhood she remembered approving redevelopment permits for, but had never stepped foot in. She would stay quiet. She would disappear. Not forever. Just long enough to remember who she was underneath the wealth. 4 days later, it was raining in soft, persistent sheets. The kind of New York rain that soaked your bones no matter how short the walk. Madeline hadn't eaten since the night before. The $40 she had left was dwindling fast. She'd spent most of it on groceries for an elderly neighbor who had offered her a spare blanket. She wandered near a corner deli and paused beneath the awning of a narrow cafe, trying to will away the hunger cramping her stomach. That's when she saw them. A man in his early 30s, tired eyes, 5 o'clock shadow calloused hands sitting cross-legged on a bench under the same overhang. A small girl, maybe 5, with tangled curls and a faded unicorn raincoat sat beside him, swinging her feet. They shared a wrapped sandwich between them, careful measured bites like they'd learned to ration joy. Madeline tried to move away, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The child noticed her first. The man followed her gaze and turned toward Madeline. His eyes weren't suspicious or guarded. They were steady. Madeline's throat burned. "I'm sorry," she said, voice barely audible over the patter of rain. "May I take those leftovers, sir?" He blinked, looked down at the half sandwich left on the wax paper. "Sure," he said, after a pause, holding it out to her like it wasn't strange at all. "They're yours." The girl tugged at a plastic baggie from her coat pocket and shyly offered a crumbled cookie. You can have mine, too. It's still good." Madeline's composure cracked. She took the food with both hands, barely whispering, "Thank you." "No problem," the man said, nodding. "I'm Jack. This is Ellie." Madeline opened her mouth, but no name came out. Finally, she said, "Mara." It was the name of a character from a novel she'd loved as a teenager, a girl who ran away from a palace to live among the people. It felt appropriate. "Well, Mara," Jack said, his voice kind. "Hope things get better." He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge her for the soaked clothes, the worn-out shoes, or the way her hands trembled when she unwrapped the sandwich like it was sacred. He just nodded and kept his arm around Ellie, whispering something that made the little girl giggle. Madeline stepped backward into the rain again, holding the sandwich and cookie like they were a lifeline. As she turned the corner, tears mixed with the rain on her face. She didn't know what had just happened, but she felt it that one moment had shifted something inside her. She wasn't used to kindness without condition, without agenda, especially not from strangers, especially not from someone with so little to give. That night, she lay curled on a worn mattress in her rented room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Jack and Ellie. She imagined the girls' laughter filling the tiny apartment, the man's calm steadiness as he shared what little they had. She could still feel the warmth of that cookie in her hand. Outside, rain tapped gently on the window pane like it wanted to be let in. And, somewhere deep inside, Madeline Walsh, the missing bride, the runaway CEO, something began to melt. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the warped window blinds of Madeline's small apartment, casting broken lines across the scratched hardwood floor. She lay on the worn mattress without moving, fully clothed blanket kicked off in the night. Her stomach no longer ached from hunger, but something deeper lingered, a gnawing sense of dislocation. In the silence, she thought about the way the little girl had smiled at her the day before. The way Jack had handed her the sandwich without hesitation, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. No one had treated her like that in years, without calculation, without expectation. At the office, every smile hid a contract. At home, even love had started to feel conditional. But that moment in the rain, that had been different. Pure. She hadn't told them who she was, didn't even use her real name, and still they had looked at her like she mattered. Madeline sat up slowly and rubbed her temples. On the cracked nightstand beside her lay the uneaten half of the cookie Ellie had given her. She'd wrapped it carefully in a paper towel, unsure why. But now she stared at it like it was more valuable than the emeralds locked away in her family's penthouse vault. She tucked it into her coat pocket and stood. Outside, the city was transitioning from rain to cold sun, the kind of crisp winter day that made breath fog up in clouds. Madeline wrapped her coat tighter and started walking, unsure of her direction, until her feet found their way back to the same cafe corner. It wasn't a conscious choice, it was gravitational. Jack and Ellie were there again, sitting on the same bench. He was repairing what looked like a broken toy truck with duct tape and quiet focus. Ellie leaned against his arm, chewing on an apple slice. Madeline paused across the street, heart hammering. She didn't know why she was nervous. She was just another face on the sidewalk. But something about that man and his daughter made her feel exposed, like they could see right through her despite knowing nothing at all. She almost turned back, but Ellie looked up and grinned. Hey, Cookie Lady Madeline blinked, then laughed despite herself. Jack glanced over his expression, warming with recognition. "Well, look who's survived the storm," he said, gently twisting the toy's wheel back into place. "Mara, right," she nodded. "I wasn't sure if you'd be here. We usually are after school drop-off." "It's part of our routine," Jack said. "Ellie gets her apple, I get 10 minutes of quiet, and this old truck gets one more chance at life. Dad says if you fix something instead of throwing it out, you learn what matters," Ellie chimed in proudly. Madeline's throat tightened. "That's a good philosophy." Jack shrugged with a quiet smile. "We don't have a lot, so we take care of what we've got." Madeline sat down at the far end of the bench, careful not to get too close. She didn't want to disturb them. She just wanted to be near it again. That warmth, that calm. "You two always this generous with strangers?" she asked gently. Jack chuckled. "You weren't a stranger. You were someone who looked like she needed something." "That's enough for me." A pause stretched between them, filled only by the hum of traffic and a distant saxophone from a subway performer. Madeline looked at him sideways. "You ever wonder who people used to be?" Jack nodded slowly. "Sure, but I care more about who they're trying to become." She swallowed hard. Over the next few days their paths kept crossing, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes not. Madeline found herself circling the neighborhood after errands she invented just to pass by that bench. Jack never pried, never questioned, but he began bringing an extra coffee. Ellie always had a drawing to show her a flower with too many petals, a crooked rainbow, a stick figure with 3 arms because she's special. Madeline kept the drawings. She folded them neatly and tucked them into her empty wallet. One morning she brought a bag of groceries to the older woman in the next apartment, Mrs. Delgado, a retired music teacher who lived alone and walked with a cane. The woman eyed her skeptically at first, but softened when Madeline offered to sweep the hall for her. "You've got hands too soft to clean," Mrs. Delgado muttered. "You one of those women running from a husband." Madeline hesitated, then said, "I'm just running from a life that didn't fit." Mrs. Delgado nodded slowly. "Takes guts to step out of a frame someone else painted for you." That night, Madeline wrote in her notebook for the first time in months. Just one line. "Maybe I'm not lost. Maybe I'm just under construction." The following weekend, Jack offered Madeline the other side of the bench like it was a regular thing now. Ellie jumped up and down, asking if she wanted to visit the community center where they were painting a mural. "I can't draw," Madeline admitted. "That's okay," Ellie said. "You can hold the paint cup. Or smile. Smiling helps." Madeline followed them without thinking. The mural was halfway done, an explosion of colors and hopeful messages. Children, parents, grandparents all adding their strokes. A man in a wheelchair painted the word home in bright green. A teenager spray-painted second chances in careful cursive under a bird in flight. Jack handed her a brush without looking. "Add something. I don't know what. Then just start." She dipped the brush into yellow and made a sun in the top corner. Crooked, too bright. But it made Ellie clap. In that moment, surrounded by strangers who smiled without knowing her name, Madeline felt something crack open. Belonging. Not because of her last name, not because of her wealth, but because of kindness, of shared space, of the simple dignity of being human together. And for the first time in a long time she didn't feel like a woman who had run away. She felt like a woman who had finally arrived. The cold had sharpened in the last few days, slicing through the city like a quiet warning that winter wasn't done yet. But in the narrow hallways of the aging brick apartment complex on Lincoln Avenue, warmth took the shape of gestures too small for headlines. Shared, coffee-held doors, nods between neighbors who had nothing to spare but still gave something. Madeline stood at the window of her apartment, watching condensation bead along the edges. Her breath clouded the glass as she stared down into the courtyard below. A boy in a navy sweatshirt chased a basketball between puddles. A couple in their 60s swept the walk together without saying a word. This wasn't the world she had been raised in, but it was the world that was slowly beginning to feel real. She glanced toward her nightstand where a folded piece of paper rested between the worn pages of a novel she hadn't managed to finish. Ellie's drawing of the 3-armed woman, because she's special. It had made her laugh at first, but now she couldn't look at it without tearing up. There was something about how earnestly that little girl saw people. Saw her. Later that afternoon, Madeline stepped into the hallway with a box of canned goods she'd picked up at a local pantry for Mrs. Delgado. The older woman had taken a fall 2 nights ago while reaching for a bottle of Tylenol. Madeline had heard the thud through the wall and rushed over to find her sitting on the floor, dignity dented, but not broken. "You're back again," Mrs. Delgado said as Madeline knocked and let herself in. "What now? Another soup that tastes like the inside of a boot?" Madeline smiled. "This one has actual seasoning. I made sure. I'll believe it when my tongue does." Despite the sarcasm, the old woman's eyes softened. She took the bag and hobbled back to her chair near the window, motioning for Madeline to sit. "You keep coming back like a dog with a bone." "What are you looking for, girl?" "I don't know," Madeline admitted, settling onto the couch. "Maybe I just needed to be somewhere people see you. Not just your name. Not your money. Just you, Mrs." Delgado made a sound in her throat somewhere between a scoff and a hum of agreement. "It's easy to forget who you are when everyone else is busy telling you." Madeline looked at her. "Did you ever forget?" "Oh, plenty of times. I was a teacher, then I wasn't. A wife, then I wasn't. You lose pieces of yourself over time, but sometimes you find new ones. Unexpected ones." She pointed a gnarled finger at Madeline. "That's what you're doing, aren't you? Finding the pieces that make sense again." Madeline nodded slowly. Something like that. The next day, Jack invited her to help fix a broken pipe in the basement of the building. "It's not glamorous," he said, handing her a flashlight. "But if you're looking to earn your keep, here's your chance." They climbed down the narrow steps into the cold, echoing dark. Water pooled along the cement floor where a pipe had cracked beneath the utility sink. Jack crouched beside it with a wrench and a patience that came from years of practice. "My landlord won't call a plumber unless something's on fire." "So I learned." Madeline knelt beside him, holding the flashlight steady. "You could have called your city council representative. Tenants' rights are pretty clear about these things." Jack shot her a sideways look, amused. "You sure know a lot about property law for someone couch surfing." She bit back a smile. "Let's say I read a lot." Jack didn't push. He just adjusted the wrench and said, "You know, most people pass this place without a glance. But you've been paying attention." Madeline blinked. "What do you mean?" "You talked to Mrs. Delgado. You helped that teenage kid when he locked himself out. You show up." "No one else ever expected me to," she said quietly. "They just expected results." Jack nodded slowly, tightening the pipe. "Well, we don't care about resumes around here. We just care who shows up when it counts." That night, as they walked back upstairs, Madeline asked, "Do you always fix things for everyone?" "I try," Jack said. "There's enough broken stuff in the world. If I can keep this little corner together, maybe that's enough." By the end of the week, Madeline's world had shrunk to this neighborhood, and strangely, it didn't feel like a loss. She walked with Ellie to the school bus. She swept the hallway when the super didn't. She carried groceries for a mother with 2 kids and no stroller. Each act was tiny. None of them solved her greater life problem, what came next when her time undercover ran out, but they filled her with a feeling she hadn't known she'd been missing relevance. And then came the letter, taped to every door in the building, stark white, cold as the wind outside. Notice of termination of tenancy. This building has been scheduled for redevelopment. All current tenants must vacate the premises within 14 calendar days. The room tilted. Madeline read the letter again and again, fingers trembling. It was official. Walsh Holdings, her company. Her name at the top, even though she hadn't seen the document until now. The signature, some junior executive she remembered hiring in a moment of arrogance. Jack stepped into the hallway as she tore it down. His jaw was set. "So, this is how it works," he muttered. "We give, we build, and then they erase us." Madeline couldn't speak. Couldn't tell him the truth, not here, not now. Her chest burned with guilt. "Looks like we've got 2 weeks," Jack said quietly, looking down the hallway like it was already fading. "Time to figure out where to go next." Then he glanced back at her eyes, softer than she deserved. "You okay?" Madeline nodded numbly, swallowing hard. But deep down, something fractured. She wasn't just part of the system that had failed these people. She was the face on the letter. And now she had to decide what kind of name she wanted to live with. The eviction notice was still clenched in Madeline's hand as she descended the creaking stairs of the apartment building. Her breath hitched chest hollow. On paper, it was just another redevelopment project streamlining low-value assets to maximize ROI. On the ground, it meant families' uprooted dreams dismantled and Jack and Ellie out on the street. All because of a decision she had once signed off on without looking past the bottom line. Now, those numbers had faces and names, and a little girl who gave away her last cookie. Outside, the air was sharp and dry. A few tenants stood huddled near the mailboxes, eyes scanning the notices posted on every surface like funeral announcements. Whispers carried, "Where will we go?" "My sister's couch." "The shelters are full again." And then Mrs. Delgado's voice cut through it all like a tired bell. "They don't care about people like us. Never have." Madeline turned toward her. The old woman leaned on her cane, a folded notice in one hand and a dignity too weathered to crumble in the other. "I'm sorry," Madeline murmured. The words felt brittle, too small. "Mrs." Delgado looked at her with eyes that had seen more winters than anyone should face alone. "Don't be sorry, be useful." That night, Madeline sat in the dark, her phone screen glowing faintly. Her hand hovered over the call button for Olivia, her former executive assistant. Olivia would still take her call. She'd kept Madeline's disappearance a secret when reporters came knocking because Olivia, unlike most people in that office, remembered Madeline before the power, before the suits. She stared at the number for a long time, then put the phone down. She wasn't ready to return yet. Not in a car with tinted windows, not with a press release and a strategic reversal. She needed to go deeper, to listen first. The next day she walked the neighborhood, not as a CEO in disguise, but as a resident, as someone desperate to understand. She visited the corner bodega where Mr. Thomas the veteran in a worn army jacket ran tabs for single mothers who couldn't pay. She stopped by the community center where Mrs. Park taught English to immigrants in the evenings using paper she bought with her own pension. She sat beside a boy on the playground whose mother worked night shifts at the laundromat 2 blocks over. "We'll move again," he said. "We always move." Madeline asked softly, "Do you want to?" He shrugged. "Sometimes, but not this time. I have a friend here. We both like the same swings." That sentence alone lodged in her chest like a splinter. She filled her notebook with names and stories. Some offered easily. Some came only in passing in body language and quiet looks. But the pain was universal. This place, this rundown building on Lincoln Avenue, was a fragile web of connection built not with money but with moments. And now it was scheduled to be erased. That evening, Jack found her sitting alone on the stoop, shoulders hunched against the wind. Ellie had fallen asleep upstairs after a long day, too tired to notice the growing tension thickening in the air. He handed her a cup of lukewarm coffee from the corner store. "It's terrible," he said, "but it's warm." She took it with a grateful nod. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Jack asked quietly, "You ever been kicked out of your home?" Madeline didn't answer right away. "I've walked away from homes," she said finally, "but never had one taken from me." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the broken steps. "I was evicted once, back in Kansas, before Ellie was born. Lost everything in the flood. Thought I'd bounce back. I didn't." She looked at him. "What happened?" "Ended up in a shelter. Slept in a car for a while after that. There were nights I had to choose between eating and buying diapers. Nights I wanted to disappear." He glanced sideways at her. "You know what saved me. What someone gave me a toolbox." Madeline blinked. "A toolbox?" "Yeah," said, "you're good with your hands. Maybe this'll help you fix things again." He smiled faintly. "Didn't fix everything, but it gave me a reason to believe I could start over." She looked down at her hands, soft and uncalloused. "I've never fixed anything with mine." Jack's voice softened. "You could start now." Later, as she walked back upstairs, Madeline paused by the community bulletin board in the lobby. Taped among yoga class flyers and missing pet signs was a printout someone had typed up in bold black letters. When they silence your voice, write it on the walls. Beneath it, someone had scribbled in red marker and will read it out loud. She stared at it for a long time. That night, she finally picked up her phone and called Olivia. Holy, Olivia answered on the first ring. You're alive. Are you safe? Where the hell are you? I'm okay, Madeline said, voice steady. But I need your help. Olivia exhaled. Let me guess. This is about the Lincoln redevelopment mess. You've seen it. I signed off on the last update. Yeah. But I didn't push the timeline. That came from finance. They're on a warpath to clean up our low-efficiency holdings. They're not holdings, Madeline said quietly. They're homes. A beat of silence. Who are you, and what have you done with the Ice Queen? Madeline laughed, a brittle, startled sound. She melted. Tell me what you need, Olivia said. No hesitation. I need access to every file, every clause, every contract related to Lincoln Avenue. Quietly. No alerts. You want to reverse the eviction. I want to undo the damage I helped create. And I want to make sure this never happens again. There was another pause. Then, okay, I'll send you everything by tomorrow. And Olivia. Yeah. Thank you for still believing in me. I never stopped. I just waited for you to believe in yourself again. As Madeline hung up, the building creaked in the cold. A floorboard settled above her. Somewhere outside, wind howled through a loose gutter. And yet within her, something rooted deep and real. The woman who once signed papers in penthouses had just started listening to people who'd never had a seat at the table. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't speaking for them. She was getting ready to speak with them. It began with a power outage. The storm that rolled into the city that night wasn't dramatic. No thunder, no lightning, just a slow, relentless drizzle that seeped into bricks and bones. By 10 p.m., the hallway lights in the building flickered and died. The heater gave up half an hour later. Madeline sat on the edge of her mattress, clutching a flashlight and listening to the pipes groan above her. She'd layered every sweater she owned, but the cold was creeping in like a thief. A knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find Jack standing in the dark holding a candle in a glass jar and a blanket tucked under one arm. We're taking refuge upstairs, he said. The back unit's got a space heater, one of those old ceramic ones that still works when nothing else does. She hesitated. I'm okay. He looked her over once. You're shivering. I'm fine. He raised a brow, the candlelight flickering across his face. You've got that look like you're trying to out stubborn hypothermia. I've won worse battles. Try winning one against Ellie. She already made a spot for you on the floor. That made her smile. I don't want to impose. You helped Mrs. Delgado carry groceries up 4 flights today, Jack said. I think you've earned some floor space. The back unit was a little warmer, though the chills still pressed at the corners. Ellie had made a nest of blankets on the living room rug, a flashlight propped under a plastic bowl to cast star-shaped shadows on the ceiling. She squealed when Madeline walked in. I saved the best spot I thought that was for the cat, Jack teased. We don't have a cat, Ellie giggled. That's why it's the best? Madeline knelt onto the edge of the nest. I don't think I've had a sleepover since I was 10. Dad doesn't let me go to sleepovers, Ellie said. He says people don't always come back. Jack froze mid-step with a pillow in hand, his jaw tightening. Ellie didn't seem to notice. She lay on her back watching the shifting lights. But you came back. Madeline's chest ached. I did, she whispered. Later that night, with Ellie fast asleep between them, Madeline sat against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. Jack handed her a mug of something hot. He'd rigged up warm milk with cinnamon using a camp stove. It's not espresso, but it's old-fashioned comfort. She accepted it with both hands. This is more than comfort. This is survival. Jack leaned back, his gaze on the window. Rain tapped softly on the glass like a lullaby. Ellie doesn't know we might not have a home soon. I haven't told her yet. Madeline nodded. She shouldn't have to carry that. I'm trying to fix it, Jack said quietly, but I don't know if I can this time. Everything's more expensive. There's nowhere left to go." He looked at her. "You ever feel like no matter how much you hold things together, life still finds a way to pry them apart?" She looked down at the mug in her lap. "Yes," she said softly. "All the time." Jack watched her for a beat. "Who did you leave behind?" The question landed like a stone in her stomach. No judgment in his voice, just the open door of someone who'd been broken too and wasn't afraid of wreckage anymore. "I left myself behind," she said after a long pause. "I lived in a world where everything had a number, profit margins, square footage, stock values. I thought if I got it all right, I'd finally feel real, whole." She looked up, but I never did, so I ran. Jack's eyes didn't waver. Sometimes running is the bravest thing we can do. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the heater hum and Ellie's slow, even breathing. "She likes you," Jack said. "I like her too. She's a good judge of character. Better than I ever was." Madeline met his eyes. "You seem like a pretty good judge to me." Jack laughed under his breath. "I gave the last of our sandwich to a woman I didn't know standing in the rain. I wasn't dangerous. I didn't think so." He tilted his head. "But you were definitely lost." She didn't deny it. "You still lost?" he asked. "I'm starting to think maybe I just took the long way home." That night, Madeline didn't dream of penthouses or headlines or conference calls. She dreamt of a kitchen with a leaky faucet, a child laughing at plastic constellations, and a man with quiet hands who fixed things that didn't belong to him. When she awoke, Ellie had curled against her like they'd always known each other. Jack was already up making toast on the camp stove. Madeline sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her. Jack turned and handed her a plate. "No eviction notice in the toast today." "That's a win." She smiled. "I'll take it." But as she chewed, a plan began to form in her mind. Not a business strategy. Not a damage control memo. A real plan. To stay. To fight. To fix what she helped break. She didn't just want to say thank you anymore. She wanted to earn her place among people who never stopped offering what little they had, even to a stranger in the rain. By the end of the week, the sense of quiet dread had settled over the building like dust in a forgotten attic. It was in the way people avoided each other's eyes in the hallway and how the bulletin board remained untouched, no new flyers pinned, no scribbled notes of borrowed sugar or missing cats. The eviction notice had silenced something. Madeline could feel it pulsing in the walls. She stood by the mailboxes with Jack, both staring at the same sheet of paper taped to the wall like a death sentence. It was colder today, wind curling around the frame of the building like fingers trying to pry it loose from the ground. "I've lived here 5 years," Jack said softly. Ellie took her first steps in the kitchen. "We painted clouds on her bedroom ceiling." He smiled faintly. That was a terrible idea, looked like a smoggy sky. But she loved it. Madeline watched him, guilt chewing through her ribs like acid. She couldn't tell him yet. Not until she had something better than an apology. The signature on the notice still made her stomach twist. Jeremy Langford, Jr. Executive, freshly promoted, once eager to impress her during quarterly reviews. He had taken her silence as permission. And now the results stood before her in bruised eyes and packed boxes. "You think if we band together," Jack continued, "the city will step in." She wanted to say yes, that the mayor's office would swoop in, that local media would care, but she'd been on the other side of that table. She knew how the machine worked. Public outcry mattered only if it embarrassed someone powerful. "I think," she said carefully, "you need more than hope. You need a plan." Jack looked at her eyes, narrowing slightly. "You always talk like someone who's read too many legal memos." "I've read more than that," she said, and meant it. Later that evening, the building's lobby was unusually quiet. Families were already preparing to move cardboard boxes stacked in corners. The smells of cooking were absent, no garlic, no fried onions, no warmth. As if everyone had accepted the sentence and slipped into mourning. Madeline knocked on Mrs. Delgado's door carrying a small box of tea and a fresh loaf of rye bread she'd found at the Saturday farmer's market. The old woman opened the door slowly, her hair in a silver braid down her back, eyes wary. "You here to say goodbye, too?" "No," Madeline said, holding up the bread like an offering. "I'm here to ask for advice." Mrs. Delgado stepped aside, wordlessly motioning for her to sit. The apartment was tidy sparse, but full of memory. A piano, scratched slightly out of tune, sat beneath the window. Sheet music was stacked neatly on the bench. Madeline had never heard her play, but now she wondered why. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, pouring the tea. "They won't listen to the residents. Not the city. Not the company. Not until it's too late." Mrs. Delgado stirred her cup slowly, her eyes on the rising steam. "That's the problem with people who don't come from struggle. You think logic will make the world bend." Madeline looked down. "I know. I've been part of that." "You still are." The question hung in the air. Madeline didn't answer right away. "I'm trying not to be," she said finally. "I've been learning." Mrs. Delgado leaned forward, her voice low. "Then stop waiting for permission. You know where the power is." That night, Madeline sent a second message to Olivia. She'd already received the internal redevelopment memos, blueprints, and board meeting minutes. She read every word twice. The project was fast-tracked to break ground within 45 days. Once the last tenant left, demolition would begin. "Can you send me the original land agreement?" she asked. Within 10 minutes, Olivia responded. "Found it. You're not going to like this." The attachment came through PDF, signed and notarized nearly 20 years ago by her father. The clause, she feared, was there. The building could not be sold or repurposed without a full 6-month written notice to tenants per Community Housing Preservation Agreement. They'd broken the contract. Her father had buried the clause in small print, but it was still binding. Her fingers flew across the screen. "Olivia, get me a copy of the original deed registration and anything signed by local housing officials in 2006. On it. Madeline. You planning what I think you're planning, I'm planning to stop this." The next morning, she sat with Jack on the stoop, sipping coffee as Ellie played nearby, chasing a paper airplane through the puddles. "I need to talk to you," she said, watching Ellie with gentle eyes. Jack turned toward her, sensing the shift in tone. "What is it?" She took a breath. She could almost hear the pages turning in her head, every line of legal jargon, every headline she'd ever helped spin. "I know who owns this building," she said, "and I know why this is happening." Jack's brow furrowed. "You've been looking into it more than that," she thought. She was the one who'd once approved the deal, the woman whose name opened doors and closed them. "I know the redevelopment is illegal," she said. "They violated a clause in the original agreement. I can stop this." Jack stared at her. "How would you know that I—" She hesitated. "Let's just say I've worked in real estate law. I know this world better than I want to admit." He didn't say anything for a moment. Finally, he asked, "Why are you doing this?" Madeline looked at him, heart raw. "Because you gave me a sandwich when you had nothing. Because Ellie shared a cookie. Because I came here to disappear, and instead, I remembered who I am." She paused, her voice softer. "And because it's my fault." Jack's face didn't change, but the silence felt like gravity. "Yours," he said finally. Madeline nodded. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but I was part of it, and I want to make it right." Jack leaned back, his eyes on the sky. Then he said almost reluctantly, "So what do we do?" She turned toward him with quiet resolve. "We fight." In that moment, something shifted between them. No longer strangers, no longer just neighbors, but allies, witnesses to each other's quiet undoing and the fragile, determined rebuild that followed. And beneath the cold December sky, a seed of hope was planted. Not in a press release, not in a courtroom, but on a stoop in a neighborhood no one powerful had ever bothered to walk through. Until now. The next morning, Madeline stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection like she didn't quite recognize it. The woman in the glass looked older than she remembered, not in years, but in truth. Her hair was pulled back, her jaw set, her eyes unflinching. Not polished, not perfect, just real. She hadn't worn makeup in weeks. Her nails were chipped, but something about her posture whispered strength. She picked up her phone and called Olivia. "It's time," she said. On the other end, Olivia didn't ask for clarification. "You want me to schedule the board meeting?" "Not yet," Madeline said. "I want to walk through that door when I'm ready with evidence, a plan, and my name." "Then you're going to need more than a speech," Olivia warned. "I'm counting on it." The days that followed moved like the ticking of a clock winding up to something seismic. Madeline spent her mornings at the library poring through property laws, historical preservation acts, and zoning records. At night, she sat with Jack in the basement of the building mapping out a grassroots strategy. They organized the tenants. Mrs. Delgado, once skeptical, now ran point on calling local news outlets. "I've been ignored by people in suits for 50 years. Let's give them something they can't ignore," she said, dialing one-handed while stirring her soup with the other. A group of teenagers offered to design posters and spread the word online. "No one listens to old buildings," one of them said, "but they listen to stories." "Let's make this place impossible to forget." They launched a campaign like Not Just Brick and Glass. Each day, someone told their story on camera. A veteran who'd found peace after PTSD. A mother who worked 2 jobs to raise twins in a 1-bedroom. Jack, holding Ellie's tiny hand, speaking softly about raising a daughter on a janitor's salary and how a small apartment had become their entire universe. Madeline stayed behind the scenes. For now. One evening, Jack walked her home after a community meeting. "You know," he said, "kicking a pebble along the sidewalk, I used to think you were running from something." "I was," she admitted. "And now," she paused, then smiled faintly. "Now I think I'm running towards something." They stopped at her door. The air between them was warmer than the December night should allow. "You're different," he said quietly. "Not just from when I met you. From most people I've ever known." She looked down, suddenly aware of how close they were. "Most people," he continued, "don't stick around when it gets messy." "You did." "I was part of the mess," she said. "The least I can do is help clean it up." Jack leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. "I don't know what you were before you came here, Mara, but I like who you are now." Her breath caught. For a moment, the rest of the world, the headlines, the lawsuits, the demolition plans fell away. But she didn't reach for him. Not yet. There was still truth left unspoken. The following morning, Madeline met Olivia at a small coffee shop on the Upper West Side. "I've booked the conference room," Olivia said, sliding a folder across the table. 10 a.m., Tuesday. "Full board will be there." "Good," Madeline said, "and the press embargoed." One of the junior editors at the Times is interested human impact piece. Wants to come down and see the building before anything runs. Madeline nodded, scanning the documents. Everything was in place, but her stomach twisted. Not with fear, with responsibility. "How are they going to react?" she asked. When I walk in again, Olivia's brow arched. "Like hyenas with brand consultants." "But it doesn't matter. You're not going there to ask permission." Madeline smiled. "I'm going to take back what matters." That night, she sat beside Jack on the rooftop, the city glowing beneath them in a million little promises. Ellie was asleep, tucked beneath the crooked stars she once painted on the ceiling. "You look like someone carrying something heavy," Jack said, handing her a mug of cocoa. She took a sip. "Tomorrow, I go back." He turned to face her. "Back where to the top floor of the glass tower I helped build. To the table I abandoned. And this time, I'm not showing up in a dress someone else picked. I'm walking in with everything I've learned down here." Jack was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You scared?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But I'm more afraid of staying silent than I am of failing." He nodded slowly, watching her with a softness that made her want to cry. "Whatever happens," he said, "Ellie and I, we won't forget what you did here. even if no one else ever knows your name." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper. "Ellie's drawing. The three-armed woman. I've kept this the whole time," she said. Jack took it smiling. "Because she's special. Because she's true," Madeline said. Then quietly she added, "And maybe that's who I want to be." Jack looked at her for a long time. Then without ceremony he took her hand. It was calloused now. A little rough from days of lifting, fixing, and standing up. But when he held it, she felt it not just the warmth, but the trust. The beginning of something not built on wealth or need or desperation. Just respect, kindness, and the quiet beginning of love. Tomorrow she would return to the boardroom. Tomorrow she would step back into the world that once molded her. But tonight, on a rooftop above a building slated for demolition beneath stars, real and painted, Madeline Walsh was exactly where she needed to be. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid to be seen. The elevator doors opened with a sterile chime, and for the first time in weeks Madeline Walsh stepped into the 30th floor of Walsh Holdings. No disguise, no hooded coat, no need to hide behind another name. The lobby hadn't changed. Polished marble minimalist florals, the quiet hum of climate control. But everything inside her had. She walked past reception. The assistant, a young man in an expensive suit who clearly didn't recognize her without heels and a designer bag, began to rise. Olivia intercepted him with a small shake of her head. "She's expected." Inside the boardroom, 11 people sat around a long mahogany table flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows that made the city outside look like a model beneath glass. At the head of the table was Jeremy Langford, smug in a tailored suit, arms crossed like he owned the skyline. He rose when he saw her surprise flickering in his eyes. "Madeline," he said carefully, "we didn't expect you back." Clearly, she replied, her voice cool but calm. "Let's begin." Olivia closed the door behind her, sat beside her, and laid out a thick folder marked "Confidential" in bold letters. "Item 1, Madeline said, sliding the document forward. "The Lincoln Avenue Redevelopment Project. Effective immediately it's suspended." Jeremy blinked. "You don't have the authority." "Yes, I do." Her tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. She turned to the board, scanning familiar faces. "In 2006, my father signed a preservation covenant with the city protecting the Lincoln Building for a minimum of 30 years from repurposing without due process. That covenant was buried in the acquisition file. It was violated. Illegally." Murmurs erupted. One of the legal counsel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I have documentation filed and notarized backed by city record," she continued, sliding copies across the table. "Your demolition order." Jeremy was not only unethical, it was in breach of contract. Which means if anyone from the press finds out, or worse, the city council, it won't just be a PR nightmare. It will be a legal liability. Jeremy's jaw clenched. "You've been gone for a month, Madeline. You disappeared. You abandoned your role. You don't get to walk back in, and I didn't abandon anything," she said, voice low but laced with steel. "I stepped away to remember why this company exists." She stood. "We used to build communities, not just property portfolios. We were about long-term value, stability, people." She let the silence stretch. "I spent the last month living in that building. I met the people you tried to erase with a backdoor vote and a glossy press packet." She pulled out her final piece. "And here's the kicker. You broke the clause and you did it without full board consent. That violates internal policy." Another round of murmurs. Jeremy stiffened. "You're grandstanding." "No," she said. "I'm correcting." She turned toward the board. "I'm not here to burn everything down. I'm here to rebuild it from the inside out. If you vote to suspend the redevelopment, we can avoid litigation, reinvest in restoration, and use the community engagement data we've gathered to pilot a new model, one that blends profit with purpose." Olivia added, "The campaign's already gone viral." "Not just brick and glass is trending. A Times piece drops tomorrow. A board member raised his hand. You've done all this in 30 days, Madeline met his gaze. No, they did it. I just finally listened. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. The Lincoln Avenue project was frozen. A committee was formed to evaluate restoration, and Jeremy Langford was placed under review for breach of process. As the room emptied, Olivia squeezed her shoulder. You didn't just walk back in. You walked tall. Madeline exhaled. Now comes the harder part. What's that? Going back. She returned to Lincoln Avenue that evening. As she stepped out of the car, no chauffeur, no press residents stood clustered outside staring. Mrs. Delgado was the first to approach. You look different, she said. I feel different, Madeline replied. You kept your word, the old woman said, her voice softer than usual. Madeline nodded. It's not over yet, but the eviction is canceled. The building's safe for now. Ellie came running, arms open. You're back, Daddy said maybe, but I said, definitely. Madeline scooped her up, burying her face in the girl's hair, blinking hard against the tears. Then she saw Jack. He stood behind the crowd, hands in his pockets, watching. When she met his eyes, he gave the smallest of nods. Not of shock, not of question, of quiet understanding. She walked over the noise fading behind her. You told them, he said. I did, and they listened. Some did, she said. The rest didn't matter. Jack tilted his head, studying her. So, what happens now, I don't know, Madeline admitted, but I'd like to stay, if that's still okay. A slow smile touched his lips. You don't need my permission. She looked up at the building behind them. Old bricks, cracked windows, flickering hallway lights. And yet, it was more beautiful than any tower she'd ever helped design. I'd like to help fix it, she said. Jack looked at her, not like a savior, not like a CEO, but like a neighbor, a partner. Then let's fix it, he said, together. That night, as lights flickered back on in the stairwells and laughter floated through open windows, Madeline Walsh sat on the stoop beside Jack and Ellie, arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't wear a power suit. She didn't carry a title. But for the first time in her life, she was home. Sunday morning came quiet and golden. The first real sunlight in days slanted across the windows of Lincoln Avenue, illuminating dust in the air like falling stars. The old building felt different now, not newer, not better, but alive in a way it hadn't been for years. A murmur of hope buzzed through the halls, past in warm greetings and smiles that didn't have to be forced. And still something inside Madeline remained unsettled. She stood in the mirror, brushing her fingers through her hair, staring at the woman looking back at her. This version of herself didn't wear masks. She didn't shrink to fit the room. She had faced the storm and spoken out, and the ground hadn't fallen beneath her. But there was one thing left undone. One truth she hadn't yet dared speak aloud. She turned, pulled on her jacket, and headed for the stairwell. Jack was in the courtyard repairing the wheel on a child's scooter that had been left outside all winter. Ellie sat cross-legged beside him, using sidewalk chalk to color a sun with a smiley face. Madeline paused in the doorway, watching them. Jack looked up first. He gave her that easy nod again, the kind that made her feel seen without pressure, noticed without scrutiny. "Morning," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Coffee's still hot if you're brave." She smiled, but didn't move toward the cup. "Can I talk to you?" He glanced at Ellie. "Sweetheart, why don't you show Mrs. Delgado your chalk masterpiece?" Ellie jumped up. "I made the sun look like it's laughing." She darted off, leaving a trail of pink chalk dust behind. Jack stood. "What's going on?" Madeline took a slow breath. "There's something I haven't told you. Not just you, the entire building." Jack's posture stiffened slightly. "Okay. I wasn't just involved in the redevelopment paperwork," she said. "I didn't just know who owned the building. I am the owner." Jack didn't move. "I'm Madeline Walsh," she said softly. "CEO of Walsh Holdings. Or, I was." Silence stretched between them, taut as piano wire. I came here because I was drowning in a life that never felt mine, and when I landed in this building broke, lost angry, I didn't expect anything from anyone. Least of all, kindness. Least of all, you. Still, he said nothing. I know how this sounds. I know what it looks like. I hid who I was. I let you think I was just another drifter. And part of me was. But the other part, the woman who signed deals without reading the fine print, the woman who almost let this building disappear, that part needed to be torn down. She looked at him, eyes brimming. You were the first person who treated me like I mattered even when you didn't know my name. And that's why I came back not to save this place, but to learn what it means to deserve it. Jack took a breath, slow and deep. I figured, he said, finally. Madeline blinked. What? He gave a one-shoulder shrug. Not at first. But the way you spoke, how you knew the law, the language, the way you looked at this place like you were seeing ghosts. I knew there was more. Then why didn't you say anything? Because I figured if you were running, you needed to run. And if you were healing, you needed space to do that too. She laughed, soft, disbelieving. You really are too good to be true. I'm just tired, he said. Tired of judging people before they have a chance to show who they want to become. He stepped closer. What you did this week, that wasn't a performance. That was earned. You could have disappeared again. You didn't. Madeline swallowed hard. I couldn't. Not anymore. He nodded. Then after a beat, he asked, So, what now? Madeline looked up at him, voice low. Now I stay. Not as a CEO, not as a savior. Just someone who wants to build something better. Jack's face softened. You already have. Their eyes held for a long, quiet second that spoke of forgiveness and trust, and something new just beginning to grow between them. Then Ellie came bounding back. Daddy, look, I made a rainbow snake and he's smiling. Jack laughed, crouching to admire her artwork. Madeline knelt beside him, her arm brushing his, not on accident. You know what she said? I think I'll draw something too. Ellie handed her a piece of chalk. Madeline looked at the blank patch of sidewalk and slowly began drawing a crooked little house. The roof was uneven, the door too small, but she colored it in like it meant something. Because it did. Jack leaned over. What's that supposed to be? She smiled. Somewhere to begin. That night, Madeline stood in her apartment now, tidier, warmer, with a fresh lamp glowing by the window. On the wall hung a framed version of Ellie's Three-Armed Woman. Next to it, a new sketch Madeline had made a son astoop, 3 figures side by side. She sat at her desk, opened her notebook, and wrote a letter. To herself, to the company, to the people who had trusted her again. Dear Lincoln Avenue. Thank you for teaching me that broken doesn't mean worthless, that lost can lead to found, and that sometimes when the world forgets to be kind, one person offering a sandwich can change everything. I came here to disappear, but I found a reason to stay. Not because of who I was, but because of who I'm learning to be. I don't know what comes next, but I know it starts here with you. Madeline. She set the pen down. For the first time in years, her name didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise. The first morning of January brought with it a frost so fine it clung like lace to the windows of Lincoln Avenue. But inside, warmth bloomed in the form of something better than heat hope. It had been a week since the redevelopment had been suspended, and while the formal restoration plans were still taking shape, the spirit of the building had already shifted. People who once passed each other without a word now exchanged coffee, helped carry strollers, fixed doorknobs, and repainted stair rails. Jack had dubbed it the Fix-It Winter. Ellie called it the Season of Kind. Madeline called it home. She stepped out of her apartment and nearly tripped over a box labeled Free Books. A handwritten sign taped to the lid read, Take one, or leave one, or read out loud to someone who can't. She smiled and opened the lid. Inside were old paperbacks, children's stories, a few Spanish-language poetry collections. She picked one with a worn blue spine, the Velveteen Rabbit, and carried it with her to the courtyard. There, Jack was fixing the hinge on the community notice board. His flannel shirt was flecked with sawdust. Ellie sat cross-legged nearby, her jeans streaked with chalk drawing houses with curly smoke and stick figure people who held hands. "Back at it already?" Madeline asked. Jack looked up. This thing was squeaking every time someone posted a flyer. Figured the board deserved better. "It's funny," she said. "You fix so many things that aren't yours." "They are now," he said simply. She hesitated, then sat beside him, flipping open the book on her lap. "Do you remember this one?" she asked. He glanced over. "Ellie made me read it 100 times last winter. Could recite it in my sleep." She smiled. "Then you know the best part." They said it together. "When a child loves you for a long, long time, then you become real." Their eyes met the quote hanging in the air between them like breath in cold sunlight. "I think that's what this place did to me," Madeline said. "Made me real." Jack's voice was quieter than usual. "You've always been real. You just didn't have anyone who saw it." She closed the book and looked at him. "You did." That afternoon, the first community meeting under the Kind Shelter Restoration Project took place in the basement rec room, formerly a dim, forgotten space with mismatched chairs and a leaky faucet. Now, strung with borrowed fairy lights and the smell of donated apple cider, it felt like the beating heart of the building. People came with ideas and stories, suggestions scribbled on napkins, printed diagrams from old neighborhood newsletters. A retired architect offered pro bono consultations. A young mother brought snacks for the kids. A high school student raised his hand and shyly proposed turning the rooftop into a garden. Madeline took notes the whole time. Not as a boss, not as a figurehead, as someone trying to listen and earn her place. When the meeting ended and people lingered just to talk, just to be, Madeline stepped into the hallway and let herself feel it fully. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a renewal. Later that night, after most residents had returned to their apartments, Jack walked her to her door. "I've been thinking," he said, hands in his coat pockets. "You don't have to keep living in that freezing studio." Madeline tilted her head. "Jack?" "I'm not saying move in," he clarified, quickly sheepish. "But the unit next to ours is empty. The super's already agreed to fix the windows. It has heat. Good bones. I could help patch it up." She laughed softly. "So this is your version of a grand romantic gesture, offering me good insulation and plumbing advice." He grinned. "We fix what we know how to fix." She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you keep trusting me?" "Because you didn't have to come back," he said. "And because when you did, you didn't come back bigger. You came back braver." She reached up, brushing a bit of sawdust from his collar. "I don't know what this is," she said, "but I know I don't want it to end." He stepped closer. "It doesn't have to." And just like that, beneath the hallway light that flickered once then steadied, he kissed her. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't planned, but it was real. When they pulled apart, neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The next morning, as the city stirred back to life after the holidays, a local reporter showed up to take photos of the building. Jack stood beside Madeline on the stoop, Ellie in between them, holding both their hands. The journalist asked, "What should the headline say?" Madeline thought for a moment, then said, "Not rescued, reclaimed," and Ellie added with a wide smile, "And there's no leftovers this time." Everyone laughed. But Madeline's eyes welled up because that line meant more than the child knew. She wasn't someone asking for scraps anymore. She was part of something belonging, giving, growing. She was no longer the woman who vanished in a wedding dress. She was the woman who stayed. The table was nothing special, just a reclaimed slab of wood Jack had salvaged from a construction site months ago. Its legs didn't match. One corner dipped slightly. The finish was uneven. But when Madeline set down the chipped ceramic plates and stepped back to take it all in, it felt like the most beautiful thing she'd ever prepared. The apartment had come to life around it. Walls now held Ellie's drawings strung together with twine and clothespins like a gallery of joy. A second-hand couch sat beneath a window freshly caulked by Jack's steady hands. The heater purred softly in the background, and in the air lingered the scent of roasted vegetable cinnamon and something warm enough to be called belonging. Tonight wasn't about celebration. It was about gratitude. It was about staying. Ellie burst through the door first, wearing a paper crown she'd made at school, shouting, "It's dinner time," and I helped stir the mashed potatoes, but only a little because Dad said I eat more than I stir. Jack followed with a smile and a six-pack of root beer. "Sorry, we're late. Someone stopped to tell the mailman that this building is famous now." Madeline laughed, taking their coats and hanging them near the heater. "Well, she's not wrong. We made the paper again this morning. And I think someone at the mayor's office actually said the words Innovative Housing Partnership without rolling their eyes." Jack raised his eyebrows. "Should we frame it? I already did," she said, grinning, pointing to a tiny clipping on the fridge pinned by a smiley face magnet. They all sat at the table. Ellie climbed up onto her usual spot between them and immediately started narrating her plate. Potatoes, carrots, bread that smells like Grandma's house. And wait, is this chicken or turkey? Madeline smiled. "It's whatever you want it to be." Ellie nodded sagely. "Then it's Christmas chicken." They dug in. No toasts, no ceremony, just bites between laughter stories exchanged with easy rhythm and eyes that lingered longer than they used to. And halfway through, Ellie leaned across the table, eyes shining. "Hey," she said, mouth full. "Remember when I gave you my cookie in the rain?" Madeline looked at her with a soft, full heart. "I remember every crumb. I thought you were a fairy." Jack nearly choked on his drink. "A what?" Ellie shrugged. "You looked sad but shiny. That's what fairies are, right?" Madeline reached across the table and took Ellie's hand. "That day, you were the magic." After dinner, Jack washed the dishes while Madeline sat on the fire escape with Ellie curled against her watching the city breathe beneath a sky spangled with quiet stars. The night air was crisp but kind. "Do you miss the tower?" Ellie asked suddenly. The tall one from the pictures in the newspaper. Madeline thought for a moment. "I used to think I needed the tower to feel like I mattered," she said. "But now I know it's not how high you climb. It's who's waiting for you at the bottom." Ellie yawned and nestled closer. "You can live here forever, you know." Madeline smiled. "That's the plan." Inside, Jack dried the last plate and stepped onto the fire escape. He leaned against the railing beside her, looking out over the street where porch lights blinked on one by one, like the city tucking itself in for the night. "I fixed the heater in Unit 3B today," he said. "And I helped Mrs. Delgado write a grant proposal for the arts program," she replied. "Busy day. Good kind." They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't need filling. Then Jack turned toward her. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't shared that sandwich?" Madeline smiled. "All the time. I didn't know who you were. Didn't know what you had or didn't. Just saw someone who looked hungry." "That's still all I was," she said, "and still all I am." Jack reached for her hand. "No, you're so much more." She looked at him, at the man who never judged, who never needed credentials to measure worth. "You know what? I think," she whispered. "What I think that leftover changed 2 lives." Jack pulled her closer. "Maybe 3. They kissed again, not like a story ending, but like one just beginning. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the city. The grant was approved. Restoration of the building would begin in spring with full resident involvement led by Madeline and Jack as community co-directors. No one would be displaced, no units lost. And 3 others like it across the city were now being evaluated under the same model. At the bottom of the letter, a note from the housing commissioner. Sometimes the strongest foundations are built by the people who refuse to leave. That evening, the residents gathered in the basement rec room again, this time not for strategy or crisis, but for stories. Madeline sat on the edge of the stage and read, "The Velveteen Rabbit, to a room full of neighbors who had become family. When she reached the line, "Real isn't how you are made. It's a thing that happens to you," her voice caught. She looked up. Jack was standing in the doorway holding Ellie, both watching her with the kind of quiet awe that never makes a sound but fills an entire room. And Madeline, once the runaway bride, the woman who vanished from marble floors and cameras, smiled through tears, her voice steady. When someone loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real. And now she was. Forever. Absolutely. Here's a warm, natural post-story audience engagement message in English. We'd love to know where are you watching from. Tell us in the comments below and share what part of the story touched you the most. If you enjoyed this story and want more heartfelt, inspiring tales like it, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment that might move your heart. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and remember sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything.